I should have known something was wrong when my wife Denise started reading. Not magazines or grocery store tabloids, actual books. Thick ones with fancy covers and pretentious titles like The Art of Feminine Liberation and Reclaiming Your Inner Goddess. The woman who once asked me if Alaska was part of Canada was suddenly discussing literary metaphors over dinner. "Jerome, you wouldn't understand," she'd say, waving her manicured hand dismissively. "It's sophisticated material. Very deep. Deep. Right. About as deep as a puddle in August." Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The transformation happened gradually, like watching a sitcom turn into a horror movie. First came the weekly book club meetings at Margaret Thompson's house, a McMansion that screamed, "My husband's midlife crisis bought this." Then Denise started canceling our Friday night dinners, our weekend plans, even my birthday celebration. "The girls need me," she'd explain, applying another coat of lipstick. "Patricia is going through a rough patch with her marriage, and Sandra needs emotional support. We're bonding over literature." Literature. I found their book once, a romance novel with a shirtless pirate on the cover. Moby Dick it wasn't. My name is Jerome Foster, and I've been married to Denise for 8 years. I work in private equity. Basically, I make money by making other people's money work harder. It's not glamorous, but it pays for Denise's shopping habits and her friends' expensive tastes. I'm 42, still in decent shape thanks to weekend boxing at Murphy's gym, and I thought I had a pretty good life. I was wrong about that last part. The first real warning sign came on a Tuesday night in October. I was working late in my home office when I heard Denise on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice had that hushed, conspiratorial tone women use when they're planning something their husbands won't like. "Don't worry about Jerome," she was saying. "He's completely clueless, spends all his time with those numbers and spreadsheets. I could parade naked through the house with a marching band and he wouldn't notice." I set down my pen and listened harder. "The next book club meeting is Thursday. Peter said he'd bring wine, that expensive French stuff from his collection. And Hugh mentioned he has some interesting stories to share. Very educational." Peter. Hugh. Those names made my stomach clench. Peter Thompson was Margaret's husband, a real estate developer with wandering eyes and too much cologne. Hugh Brennan was married to Patricia, worked in marketing, and had the kind of smarmy smile that made me want to practice my left hook. "Oh, and Sandra's bringing that massage oil she bought online, the one that supposedly enhances sensitivity." I nearly dropped my calculator. "Jerome's working late again anyway," Denise continued. "He never asks questions about book club anymore. I think he's actually relieved to have me out of the house." The conversation ended with giggles and promises to bring the good stuff to Thursday's meeting. I sat in my office for another hour, staring at spreadsheets without seeing the numbers. 8 years of marriage, and my wife was discussing massage oil with other men's wives like they were planning a goddamn orgy. Maybe they were. Thursday came faster than I wanted. Denise spent 2 hours getting ready for book club, which apparently required a push-up bra, her tightest jeans, and enough perfume to knock out a horse. She kissed my cheek on her way out, a quick, distracted peck that felt more like a dismissal than affection. "Don't wait up," she called over her shoulder. "We're discussing a really long book tonight. Might go late." I waited exactly 30 minutes before driving to Margaret's house. The Thompson place sat on Elm Street like a monument to suburban excess, circular driveway, fountain in the front yard, and enough security lights to illuminate a football stadium. I parked across the street behind a cluster of oak trees and settled in to watch. What I saw made me freeze. Through the living room window, I could see 6 people arranged on couches and chairs. 3 women, Denise, Margaret, and Patricia. 3 men, Peter, Hugh, and Sandra's husband, David. No books in sight. Instead, there were wine bottles, dim lighting, and way too much touching for a literary discussion. I watched Peter's hand rest on Denise's knee while she laughed at something Hugh was saying. Patricia was practically sitting in David's lap, and Margaret was feeding grapes to Hugh like he was a Roman emperor. The whole scene looked like the opening act of a porn movie. My wife, leaned over and whispered something in Peter's ear that made him grin like a teenager. His hand moved higher up her thigh. I started the car and drove home before I did something stupid, like march in there and start throwing punches, like demand explanations I wasn't ready to hear, like discover exactly how long this had been going on. Instead, I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat in my kitchen, trying to process what I'd witnessed. The book club was a cover. The sophisticated literary discussions were bullshit. My wife was cheating on me, and apparently, so were all her friends. But here's the thing about working in private equity. You learn to think strategically. You don't make emotional decisions based on incomplete information. You gather data, analyze patterns, and then you strike with surgical precision. I was going to need proof, real evidence, not just suspicious behavior and wandering hands. If Denise wanted to play games, I'd make sure I understood all the rules first. The next morning, I called Tommy Rodriguez, a private investigator I'd used for corporate due diligence. Tommy was ex-military, discreet, and had a talent for uncovering secrets people thought they'd buried. "I need surveillance on my wife," I told him over coffee at Murphy's Diner. "Her book club meetings, shopping trips, lunch dates, everything." Tommy nodded without judgment. In his line of work, cheating spouses were probably routine. "How long you want me on this?" "Until I have enough evidence to end this marriage on my terms." That could get expensive. I thought about Denise's hand on Peter Thompson's knee, the way she'd laughed at Hugh's jokes, the massage oil Sandra was supposedly bringing to enhance sensitivity. "Tommy," I said, "this is the best investment I'll ever make." Tommy worked fast. Within a week, my phone was buzzing with updates that made my stomach churn and my fists clench. Photos of Denise entering the Riverside Motel with Peter Thompson on Tuesday afternoon. Video of her having lunch with Hugh Brennan at Romano's, the expensive Italian place she claimed was too pricey for casual dining. Credit card receipts showing charges at Victoria's Secret, a massage parlor, and a boutique hotel downtown. But the real bombshell came on a Friday morning when Tommy handed me a manila envelope thick enough to choke a horse. "You're not gonna like this," he warned, sliding the package across the table at Murphy's Diner. "But you said you wanted everything." I opened the envelope and immediately wished I hadn't. Photos spilled out like evidence from a crime scene. Denise with Peter, Denise with Hugh, Denise with David Kellerman, Sandra's husband, at a wine bar I'd never heard of. The timestamps showed this had been going on for months, maybe longer. "There's more," Tommy said quietly. "Your wife's not just cheating. She's the ringleader. According to my surveillance, she's been setting up these meetings between all the couples, like some kind of suburban swinging coordinator." I stared at a photo of Denise kissing David in his car outside a Starbucks. The timestamp read 2:47 p.m. on a Wednesday. I'd been in my office working on quarterly reports while my wife was playing musical spouses with our neighbors. "The other wives know?" I asked. "Oh yeah, Margaret, Patricia, Sandra, they're all in on it. Turns out book club is code for spouse swapping night. They rotate partners, share locations, even have a group chat where they rate performance." Tommy pulled out his phone and showed me screenshots. A text thread labeled "Literary Ladies" contained messages that would make a sailor blush. Denise had given Peter Thompson 4 stars and complained that Hugh needed to work on his stamina. Margaret had posted a photo of lingerie with the caption, "Thursday night outfit, David's favorite color." I felt sick. Not just because my wife was cheating, but because she was treating it like a game, like our marriage was some kind of joke she shared with her friends over wine and orgasms. "What about the husbands?" I managed to ask. "They think they're getting away with something. Group chat called Book Club Dads, where they brag about their conquests and plan logistics. Peter's been pushing for them to invite more couples. Says the literary society should expand membership. I closed the envelope and signaled the waitress for more coffee. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clearing. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by something colder and more focused. I need copies of everything, I told Tommy. Photos, messages, receipts, surveillance videos, all of it. What are you planning? I'm going to destroy them. Tommy raised an eyebrow. Legally, right? Because murder's bad for business, and I don't do alibis. Legally, I confirmed, but thoroughly. That weekend, Denise announced another book club meeting. We're reading something really challenging, she said, applying lipstick in our bedroom mirror. Might run late again. What book? I asked casually. She paused for just a second, long enough to reveal she was scrambling for an answer. It's called 50 Shades of Literature. Very avant-garde. You wouldn't be interested. 50 Shades of Literature. Christ, she wasn't even trying anymore. Have fun, I said. I'll probably work late anyway. After she left, I spread Tommy's evidence across my dining room table like a general planning a military campaign. Photos, transcripts, financial records, enough ammunition to level a small city. But I needed more than evidence. I needed a strategy that would expose their lies, destroy their social circle, and leave them with nothing but the wreckage of their own stupidity. I started with research. Peter Thompson's real estate business was leveraged to the hilt, and his partnership agreement contained a morality clause that could void his contracts. Hugh Brennan worked for a family-owned marketing firm where the CEO was a deacon at St. Mary's Catholic Church. David Kellerman was up for a promotion at his accounting firm, a promotion that required a security clearance and background check. The wives were more vulnerable than they realized. Margaret Thompson was president of the Parent-Teacher Association at Riverside Elementary, a position that required moral leadership, according to their charter. Patricia Brennan ran a catering business that depended on referrals from church groups and community organizations. Sandra Kellerman volunteered as a youth counselor at the YMCA. All of them had reputations to protect, careers to lose, and social standing that could evaporate overnight. They'd built their little private club on a foundation of lies and secrecy, never considering what would happen if someone pulled away the curtain. I was about to become their worst nightmare. The first phase of my plan was simple. Let them think they were winning. I started working longer hours, giving Denise more freedom to attend her book club meetings. I stopped asking questions about her schedule and began acting like the oblivious husband they believed me to be. Jerome's been so distracted lately. I overheard Denise telling someone on the phone. I think he's having a midlife crisis, spending all his time at work or that grimy boxing gym. Honestly, it's like being married to a ghost. Perfect. Let them think I was checked out, unaware, and harmless. Let them get comfortable with their deception. The more confident they became, the harder they'd fall when I pulled the rug out from under them. Meanwhile, Tommy continued gathering evidence. More photos, more messages, more proof of their elaborate betrayal. We documented every meeting, every lie, every moment of their twisted game. By the end of November, I had enough evidence to ruin 6 marriages and destroy 3 businesses. But I wanted more than just evidence. I wanted them to face consequences in front of the entire community. I wanted their friends, neighbors, and colleagues to see exactly what kind of people they really were. I wanted their children to understand why their parents' marriages were ending and their social circle was imploding. I wanted justice served with a side of public humiliation. The opportunity came sooner than expected. December brought the annual Riverside Community Holiday Party, a social event that drew half the town to the community center for dinner, dancing, and enough gossip to fuel conversations until spring. This year, Margaret Thompson was organizing the event, which meant the entire book club would be there, playing their roles as devoted wives and pillars of the community. It was perfect. I spent 2 weeks preparing for what I privately called Operation Literary Criticism. Tommy helped me compile the evidence into a comprehensive presentation. Photos, messages, financial records, and surveillance footage organized chronologically to tell the complete story of their deception. "You sure about this?" Tommy asked as we reviewed the materials one final time. "Once you pull this trigger, there's no going back. These people will be radioactive." "Good," I replied. They should have thought about consequences before they decided to turn my marriage into a joke. The night of the party, Denise spent 3 hours getting ready. Hair, makeup, a new dress that probably cost more than most people's car payments. She looked stunning, which made what I was about to do feel both easier and harder. "You clean up nice," she said, adjusting my tie with the casual intimacy of 8 years of marriage. For a moment, I almost felt guilty about what was coming. Then I remembered the photos of her with Peter Thompson, and the feeling passed. "Thanks. You look beautiful too." And she did. Beautiful, treacherous, and completely unaware that her world was about to end. The community center was decorated like a winter wonderland, complete with fake snow and enough Christmas lights to power a small city. The usual crowd was there: families, couples, local business owners, and politicians working the room like it was campaign season. Margaret Thompson held court near the entrance, accepting compliments on the decorations with the gracious smile of someone who believed her secrets were safe. I spotted the entire book club within minutes. Peter Thompson was working the bar, telling jokes and playing the role of successful businessman. Hugh Brennan was discussing marketing strategies with potential clients, his wedding ring catching the light as he gestured. David Kellerman was near the buffet table, looking nervous and checking his phone every few minutes. The wives clustered together like a coven, whispering and giggling while their husbands worked the room. They looked so confident, so secure in their deception. Patricia Brennan was wearing a dress that showed enough cleavage to distract a monk, and Sandra Kellerman kept touching her hair in a way that screamed, "I'm getting laid tonight." Denise fit right in, laughing at their private jokes and shooting meaningful glances at their husbands. To anyone watching, they looked like close friends enjoying a social evening. Only I knew they were planning the logistics of their next orgy. I waited until after dinner, when people were relaxed and the alcohol had loosened tongues. Then I approached Margaret Thompson, who was standing near the small stage where announcements were usually made. "Margaret, wonderful party," I said with my best smile. "Mind if I say a few words? I have an announcement about the book club." Her face lit up. "Of course, Jerome. How thoughtful. I didn't know you were interested in literature." "Oh, I've become very interested lately, especially in the books you've all been reading." She looked confused but handed me the microphone. The room gradually quieted as I stepped onto the small platform. 200 faces turned toward me, including 6 that were about to learn what real fear looked like. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "I want to talk to you about education, specifically about a very special book club that's been meeting in our community." I saw Denise's face change first. The color drained from her cheeks as she realized what was happening. Margaret Thompson looked puzzled, while Patricia and Sandra exchanged worried glances. "This book club has been very dedicated to their studies," I continued. "They meet multiple times a week, sometimes at the Riverside Motel, sometimes at Romano's restaurant, and occasionally at each other's homes, when their spouses are conveniently absent." The room was silent now. I could see people pulling out their phones, sensing that something dramatic was about to unfold. The reading material has been quite diverse. For example, on November 15th, my wife Denise and Peter Thompson spent 3 hours studying anatomy at the Riverside Motel. Very hands-on research. Margaret Thompson gasped. Peter's face went white. Denise was shaking her head frantically, but I was just getting started. On November 20th, Patricia Brennan and David Kellerman had an intensive literature discussion at the Hilton downtown. The hotel bill shows they ordered room service and champagne. Apparently, serious academic work requires proper refreshments. Patricia made a strangled noise. David had disappeared into the crowd, probably heading for the exit. And just last week, Sandra Kellerman and Hugh Brennan conducted a very thorough book review at Margaret's house while she was supposedly visiting her mother. The security cameras captured some fascinating interpretations of the text. The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, the scraping of chairs as people stood for a better view. Margaret Thompson was screaming, "This is insane!" while Patricia Brennan pushed through the crowd toward the exit. Sandra Kellerman had started crying, but I wasn't finished. "The most impressive part of this book club," I said, raising my voice over the chaos, "is their dedication to sharing knowledge. They've created group chats to discuss their favorite passages, rate different reading techniques, and coordinate study sessions. Very collaborative." I pulled out my phone and began reading directly from their messages, my voice carrying over the microphone like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. From Denise, November 10th. Peter gets 4 stars but needs to work on his endurance. Hugh is more creative but talks too much during the good parts. The crowd was in full chaos now. Someone was recording with their phone. Margaret Thompson was screaming at her husband, who was trying to push through the crowd. Patricia Brennan had collapsed into a chair, sobbing. From Margaret, November 15th. David brought those handcuffs I mentioned. Sandra's going to love Thursday night. That was apparently Sandra's breaking point. She lunged toward the stage, screaming obscenities and trying to grab the microphone. 2 men from the crowd held her back while she shrieked about lies and manipulation. From Peter Thompson, November 20th. We should invite the Hendersons next month. Fresh faces for the Literary Society. Peter Thompson chose that moment to throw a punch at Hugh Brennan, apparently deciding that Hugh was somehow responsible for this disaster. Hugh ducked. Peter's fist connected with David Kellerman instead, and suddenly half the room was involved in a brawl that would have made my boxing coach proud. I stepped back and watched the chaos unfold. 8 years of marriage, 8 years of trust and partnership, and this was how it ended, with my wife's affair partners beating the hell out of each other while their wives screamed accusations and the entire community watched in horror. It was beautiful. The aftermath of the holiday party was swift and merciless. By Monday morning, the story had spread through Riverside like a virus, mutating and growing with each retelling. Social media exploded with photos and videos from the party, turning my public revelation into the most entertaining scandal in the town's history. The professional consequences came first. Peter Thompson's real estate partnership dissolved within 48 hours, when his business partners invoked the morality clause in their agreement. His clients started canceling contracts, and the bank called in his loans. Turns out that leveraging everything you own to fund a luxury lifestyle becomes problematic when your reputation implodes overnight. Hugh Brennan lasted exactly 1 day at the family marketing firm before the CEO, that Catholic deacon I'd researched, terminated his employment for conduct incompatible with company values. His clients followed Peter's example, fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. David Kellerman's security clearance was suspended pending investigation, effectively ending his promotion and putting his current job at risk. Government accountants, apparently, are expected to maintain higher moral standards than the average citizen. The wives faced their own reckoning. Margaret Thompson was forced to resign from the PTA after an emergency meeting where outraged parents demanded her removal. Patricia Brennan's catering business collapsed when church groups and community organizations canceled their contracts. Sandra Kellerman was quietly asked to step down from her volunteer position at the YMCA. But the social destruction was even more satisfying than the professional consequences. These people had built their lives around their reputation and standing in the community. They were the couples everyone envied, successful, attractive, seemingly perfect. Now, they were pariahs, whispered about in grocery store aisles, and avoided at community events. Denise tried to salvage our marriage with a combination of tears, apologies, and accusations that I was cruel and vindictive. She moved back in with her parents after I changed the locks and had her belongings packed by a moving company. Her parents, pillars of St. Mary's Catholic Church, were reportedly devastated by their daughter's behavior and deeply disappointed in her choices. "You destroyed 6 marriages," she screamed at me during one of our final conversations. "6 families, Jerome. Children are going to grow up in broken homes because of your revenge." "I didn't destroy anything," I replied calmly. "I just turned on the lights. You destroyed your own marriage the first time you met Peter Thompson at that motel. We could have worked through this. Couples therapy, counseling. Denise, you were running a suburban private club. You rated your lover's performance in group chats. You planned orgies while I was working to pay for your lifestyle. Exactly which part of that suggests you wanted to work on our marriage?" She had no answer for that. Just more tears and accusations about my calculated cruelty, as if 8 months of systematic betrayal was somehow less cruel than one night of public revelation. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly smooth. Denise's lawyer advised her to accept my terms rather than face a trial where all the evidence would become public record. She got the car and half our savings. I got the house, my retirement accounts, and the satisfaction of knowing she'd spend years rebuilding a reputation I destroyed in 10 minutes. But the real satisfaction came from watching their social circle implode. Without the book club to hold them together, the couples turned on each other with vicious efficiency. Margaret blamed Peter for corrupting the group. Patricia accused Sandra of being the instigator. The men pointed fingers at each other, each claiming they'd been reluctant participants in someone else's scheme. Hugh Brennan tried to reconcile with his wife by claiming he'd been seduced by older, more experienced women. That lasted until Patricia Brennan released screenshots of his messages, including detailed descriptions of positions he wanted to try and complaints about his wife's boring approach to intimacy. Peter Thompson attempted to salvage his business reputation by claiming the whole thing was a setup, that I'd somehow manipulated evidence to frame innocent people. That theory collapsed when Tommy released additional surveillance footage showing Peter entering the motel with 3 different women over a 6-week period. David Kellerman simply disappeared, quit his job, sold his house, and moved his family to another state without telling anyone their destination. Sandra filed for divorce from a distance, communicating only through lawyers. The most poetic justice came at the next community event, a spring fundraiser for the local library. The same people who'd witnessed my revelation gathered again, but the social dynamics had completely changed. The book club couples were either absent or sitting alone, avoided by neighbors who'd once considered them friends. I attended with my date, Rebecca Martinez, a corporate lawyer I'd met through work. She was intelligent, funny, and refreshingly honest about her intentions and expectations. No games, no deception, just adult conversation and mutual respect. "Is it weird being here?" Rebecca asked as we watched Margaret Thompson sitting alone at a corner table picking at her salad and avoiding eye contact with everyone. "Not weird," I said. "Satisfying. Do you ever feel guilty about how public you made it?" I considered the question while watching Peter Thompson's ex-business partner give a speech about community values and ethical leadership. Peter himself was notably absent, reportedly working as a car salesman in the next county. "They made their choices in private," I said finally. "I just made sure the consequences were public. They wanted to play games with other people's lives and marriages. They got to learn that games have winners and losers." Rebecca nodded approvingly. "Remind me never to cheat on you. Remind me never to give you a reason to." As the evening wound down, I found myself face to face with Patricia Brennan near the coat check. She looked older, tired, and bitter in a way that aged her beyond her years. I hope you're satisfied, she said quietly. You destroyed everything we built. What you built was a lie, I replied. I just removed the foundation. We were happy, all of us. Our marriages were stronger because... Your marriages were stronger because you were cheating on your spouses? Patricia, do you hear yourself? She stared at me for a long moment, searching for words that might justify 8 months of systematic betrayal. Finally, she just shook her head and walked away. I watched her leave, alone and defeated, and felt something I hadn't expected: pity. Not enough to regret my actions, but enough to recognize that she'd convinced herself the lies were truth. They'd all convinced themselves that their deception was somehow noble, that their betrayal was actually strengthening their marriages. Self-deception is a powerful drug, but reality is a harsh cure. 6 months later, I was boxing at Murphy's gym when Tommy Rodriguez walked in with a manila envelope and a grin that meant trouble. "You're gonna love this," he said, dropping the envelope on the bench next to my water bottle. I unwrapped my hands and opened the package. Inside were photographs, financial documents, and what appeared to be a police report. The photos showed Hugh Brennan in handcuffs, being led away from a downtown hotel. The police report detailed charges of solicitation and public indecency. "Turns out Hugh didn't learn his lesson," Tommy explained. "Got busted in a sting operation targeting a prostitution ring. Apparently he's been a regular customer since his divorce." I flipped through the documents, shaking my head at the stupidity. "How did you get these?" "Professional curiosity. I like to keep tabs on former subjects, see how their stories end." The financial documents showed Hugh living in a studio apartment and working part-time at a telemarketing company. His ex-wife had taken him for everything in the divorce, including his pension and half his future earnings. Now he was paying for closeness with money he couldn't afford, while facing criminal charges that would make him unemployable in any legitimate profession. "What about the others?" I asked. Tommy pulled out his phone and scrolled through what appeared to be surveillance photos. Peter Thompson's selling used cars and living with his mother. Margaret divorced him and moved to Florida with their kids. David Kellerman's working construction in Arizona. His ex-wife got the house and custody. And the wives? Patricia's working retail at the mall. Sandra remarried some guy she met online, but that's already falling apart. Margaret's doing okay. Got a job with a nonprofit in Tampa, started over completely. I studied the photos of Hugh's arrest, remembering the confident, successful marketing executive who joked about expanding their literary society to include more couples. Now, he was just another middle-aged man paying for companionship and facing the consequences of choices that had seemed so clever at the time. "You feel bad for them?" Tommy asked. "No," I said without hesitation. "They made their choices. They knew the risks." "Even your ex-wife?" That was a more complicated question. Denise had tried to contact me several times over the past months. Emails, phone calls, even a handwritten letter delivered to my office. She was working as a receptionist at a dental office and living in a one-bedroom apartment across town. Her parents had eventually forgiven her, but their relationship remained strained. In her last message, she'd written, "I know you'll never forgive me, but I want you to know I understand why you did what you did. I destroyed something good because I was bored and selfish and stupid. I'm sorry for all of it." I'd read the letter twice and then thrown it away. Apologies were easy when the consequences were already set in stone. Understanding came cheap when the damage was permanent. Denise made her choice too, I told Tommy. She chose excitement over stability, lies over honesty, and strangers over her husband. I just made sure she got to live with those choices. Tommy nodded and gathered up the documents. "You know, most people would have just filed for divorce and moved on. Why did you need to burn down their entire world?" It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself many times over the past year. The simple answer was that divorce wouldn't have been enough. Denise and her friends had treated their betrayal like a game, laughing about their deception and planning their next moves like it was all just harmless fun. They'd felt clever and superior, convinced they were getting away with something. I'd wanted them to understand that actions have consequences, that other people's lives and emotions aren't toys to be played with. I'd wanted them to feel the same humiliation and betrayal they'd inflicted on their spouses. But the deeper answer was simpler and more personal. They'd underestimated me. They'd seen a quiet, hard-working husband and assumed I was weak, oblivious, and harmless. They'd mistaken my focus on work and respect for privacy as stupidity and indifference. Because they needed to learn that the people they hurt aren't as powerless as they assumed, I said finally. And because I wanted them to remember that lesson for the rest of their lives. Tommy laughed and headed for the door. Remind me never to piss you off. After he left, I finished my workout and drove home to the house I'd shared with Denise for 8 years. It was quieter now, cleaner, and somehow more peaceful without the constant undercurrent of deception and lies. I'd redecorated the bedroom, replaced the furniture in the living room, and turned Denise's craft room into a home office. Rebecca was coming over for dinner, a simple evening of good food, honest conversation, and the kind of companionship that didn't require games or deception. We'd been dating for 4 months, taking things slowly and building something based on mutual respect rather than passion and drama. Any word from your ex-wife lately? Rebecca asked over dinner. Not for a couple months. I think she's finally accepted that we're done. Do you think she learned anything from all this? I considered the question while cutting my steak. Denise's final letter had suggested some level of self-awareness, some understanding of how her choices had destroyed multiple families and relationships. But understanding and learning were different things. Maybe, I said, but it doesn't matter. Her education wasn't my responsibility. Rebecca smiled. You're a hard man, Jerome Foster. Fair, I corrected. I'm a fair man. There's a difference. Later that evening, as Rebecca slept beside me in the bed I'd once shared with a woman who'd rated her lover's performance in group chats, I thought about the concept of justice. The book club couples had believed they were entitled to excitement, variety, and consequence-free deception. They'd thought their marriages and reputations were shields that would protect them from the fallout of their choices. They'd been wrong about that, just as they'd been wrong about me. Hugh Brennan was facing criminal charges and financial ruin. Peter Thompson was selling used cars and living with his mother. David Kellerman was swinging a hammer in the Arizona desert. Their ex-wives were working retail jobs and struggling to rebuild lives they'd destroyed for temporary thrills. And Denise was alone in a one-bedroom apartment, understanding too late that the excitement she'd craved had cost her everything stable and good in her life. I'd given them all exactly what they'd earned, the consequences of their choices, delivered with the same careful planning they'd used to deceive their spouses. They'd wanted to play games with other people's lives and emotions. I'd simply made sure they understood the rules. The last laugh, as it turned out, was mine. But as I drifted off to sleep next to a woman who valued honesty over excitement and respect over games, I realized something important. Revenge had been satisfying, but building something new was better. Destroying their world had been justice. Creating a better one was victory. In the morning, I would wake up next to someone who chose to be there, in a house free of lies and deception, with a life built on honesty rather than games. The book club couples would wake up to the consequences of their choices, the wreckage of their reputations, and the knowledge that their actions had destroyed everything they'd once valued. That seemed like a fair trade, and if any of them ever wondered whether their brief excitement had been worth the permanent consequences, they could ask themselves a simple question. Was the game worth the price? The answer, for all of them, was clearly no. But they'd learned that lesson too late to matter.